Okay, we're in the midst of dealing with wine for the Arba Koises and what that entails. Is Yein Shalonu, he says, our wines that we have are enough watered down, and they're also made. The wines that we deal with in the times of a Chazal had a different type of fermentation than what our wines have. And therefore, toivim heim b'loy mezika. Yoyse toivim heim b'loy mezika. It's better not to dilute them. Achimayayin mazikoi. But let's say you have wine that can cause you to be damaged or to hurt you. Mutar l'moizge calls matcha royal kiddush. You can go and water it down as long as it's considered royal kiddush. The Day is b'shir hamazika, and there are different understandings how much you can water it down. L'maisei limzlik elaboivin she yishaya harov yayin. At the end of the day, there has to be a majority of wine in there. And many of our wines have been already watered down when they were created. And therefore you have to be careful to know, if you have a certain product of wine, how far you can go ahead and take it down. Okay, so let's see this halacha, and then we'll go back to one halacha. So it says over here, don't dilute wine, if at all possible. Now you can put in a little bit water, a couple, but to go ahead and put in a quarter water, no such thing. Here, and he brings that from the Shulchan Aruch. Shulchan Aruch Simin Tofayin Bei Shiur HaKos Revius. The shear of a cup of wine has to be a revius la'achar shim zigenu, after you dilute it. If you have to dilute it, that's what he brings down in Shulchan Aruch. Those are the words. Now, what is revius? That already, there's different Reb Chaim Noah shear, Moshe Feinstein shear, and the Chazon Ish shear. And what people say is the Chazon Ish shear, or what other people say the Chazon Ish shear is even bigger than that. So you're going all the way from Chaim Noah shear, which is 2.9, to the bigger shear of the Chazon Ish, which is 6.3. Personally, I say that if you go with the regular Chazon Ish shear, which is 5.1, you're all good to go. But you have to ask your local rabbi. Now, from this sif in Shulchan Aruch, maybe you can tell him to be a little bit lower. Jonathan, go and say to make it a little bit lower because I can't concentrate. That we can also dilute. It explains, let's say someone doesn't drink wine because it can hurt him, or he in fact disdains the taste of wine. Differently than other places, he has to really push himself to become the mitzvah of Arba Koises. Morgan Avram nearly the Rishoyim L'moizga Heitiv calls matcha royal kiddush, as long as it can be used for kiddush. Now, what does that mean? So it's brought down in Siman Ayin Reish Beis Arev that Yayin Chai, if it's undiluted wine, afilim hu chazik the dari al chat klas maya. Technically, even if it's the strongest type that we say you can dilute it 1 to 3 parts, mekachin olav, you're allowed to do kiddush on it, still, even under those dire circumstances that it's so strong. It's best to dilute it to the proper fashion, even though, and it should be diluted properly. It's brought down. Over here, the mechab is very, very unclear, and he doesn't give you any type of guidance what it means to dilute. How much water you can put in. The Ramah adds a little bit light to it. He says, even our wines that are not as strong as that they were during the Yemei Chazal, as long as it's not 6 parts to 1, ein hayayin bottle, the wine does not become bottle. You can make a bari pri agofen. Because of Hamogin Avram, the called the ispek sas yoisim echad mishisha biyayin. If it has 1 of 6 parts of wine, if it's common to do it, we say that since that's the way they go ahead and they dilute it, even 1 to 6 parts is okay. B'mishnah Berurah, v'chein in Kiddush kosav Mishnah Berurah, destam yain shalanu ad karav l'shisha chalok emayim adayin islay shem yain in Kiddushim aderech shel b'nei adam l'zuk b'shirahu. However, nowadays most people do not dilute wine from 1 to 6 parts, and you have to know which wine company you're dealing with and how it works, because at the end of the day, there's 2 questions about the wines. One question about the wine is vis-a-vis the halacha of whether it has a taste of wine. And then when it comes to Leil Seder, there's a second problem with the wine. What exactly is derech cheres? Because you're supposed to use a wine with an alcohol content. And many a time today, the wines have a very, very low alcohol content. There's special wines made, and they do it because there's a certain way how they process it to what they call freeze it, that should stop the alcohol content. Like we have over here our own homemade wine that we use for the Seder, and it's probably much higher alcohol content. I can tell you, looking into this, I mentioned a little bit by Shabbos HaGodel, that there's nothing wrong with mixing it with grape juice, because there were Rabbonim, Choshev Poiskim, like Rabbi Yashiv and Rabbi Shlomo Zalman, that used to dilute maybe at an older age, but they used to dilute their wines with grape juice to a certain extent. And in fact, with Rabbi Yashiv, he did not go for a dry wine without sugar, but he wanted on Seder night to have a wine that is without sugar, but he didn't want to, like they say, dislike it, oisoinoi. And he wanted to have that the wine, besides cheres, is that alcohol content, you have to have a certain amount of enjoyment to it. It's not that you're taking it like medicine. So therefore, they once went out and they got 5 different dry wines that have no sugar content, and he was given that to taste, and he took one of those 5, but he did dilute it with some grape juice as well, that he shouldn't have his head spinning a whole Leil Seder. So, and Reb Shlomo Zalman also mixed it. So some people try to drink wine undiluted at all and not even have a grape juice to it. Personally, if it's good enough for those psakim like Rav Shlomo Zalman and Rabbi Yashiv, it's good enough for me personally. And therefore, if you have to, you could go ahead and dilute it with grape juice. And I do that last couple of years, even though I used to stop, not drink wine by Leil Seder I used to not drink, but now I have this very strong wine alcohol content that's homemade, so I dilute it with some grape juice as well.
What fraction could you down to 3.5% alcohol?
What's the lowest fraction of alcohol? Could be if you take a 3.5-4% alcohol. There's no reason to dilute with grape juice. We're talking about where it's
12%.
Huh?
If you took how much?
12.5.
How much would you add? How much grape juice?
I would say a quarter. A quarter grape juice.
Quarter grape. Oh.
Yeah.
The grape juice is homemade too, right?
Huh?
Rebbe uses homemade grape juice?
I use homemade grape juice as well. Yeah.
To water it down, or do you use the ketchup?
No, I use, but it's Leil Seder. I use home. Everything's homemade. But that's neither here nor there. Halachically, that's a matter of you want to do your own thing.
It's nice to know what the Rebbe does.
Okay. Omnam be'elio Rabbe Kosher b'shem oilus tamid achshav sheinahagim klalim zoykienis refuyim b'mayim. Nowadays, you don't dilute your wines in real water content. You put maybe a little bit. If you put in a bit of water, even if the water is not as much as the wine, that's what we do. Meaning, he says over here, go up to, even if it's less than 50%. That's why I say a quarter maybe. It's not such a simple thing to give an answer on. The Kosher this is all from the Eliyahu Rabbah. The Kosher Rabbah Delachit Hishmet HaLavush is Divrei Amah. The Lavush, when he brings down this on a halachic basis, he doesn't even mention the Ramah, that you can dilute it. The B'emes the B'yeni Shalanu, because the Lavush is of the personal opinion that our wines ain't behem din mezika the karev levav chalok emayim. That there's no din of mezika even to 1 to 6. Umash mishim etzad l'dini kedivrei kedivrei elu. V'chein echriya pri megadim. The B'yeni Shalon also pri megadim holds. Kol sheyesh roiv mayim. Once you have too much water in there, royal levarach shehakol. V'nish ein kan pluk the klal bein hapoiskim. You can say, he says, maybe you don't. There's no machlokes. Because at the end of the day, the Magen Avram says it has to be the way people dilute wine. Because otherwise, just because you don't like the wine more, you're different than most people. So therefore, we don't go according to your personal tastes. If we say 1 to 6, he says over here 1 to 6. We don't really dilute wine. Therefore, since it's not our way of doing things, then we don't make a Bai Pri Hagafen. So technically, if there was a place that they do dilute the wines, then you have the right to do it. But nowadays you don't. Nowadays, when people take a cup of wine, you go to a banquet, or you go to any type of gathering, and they put out wines on the table. Do you see people pouring water and wine together? Nobody does that. Huh? Okay, you do. So that's called, okay, some people do it, but they do it, it's called a spritz, I think. So, but I'm talking about when you want to drink wine per wine. Of course, it's the personal taste that you take a spritz. But that's not in the norm for wine drinking.
It's made to drink out of the bottle.
Huh?
It's made to drink,
To drink out of the bottle, right. So therefore, Batla Daitates the Kolod. Okay, and he goes even further than that. He says, V'chein mizbayim medivrei aruch hashulchan shekosav v'zel l'shoynei. V'da. Let it be known. The Yein Shalonu ein eruyim lemziga klal. He holds that you can't, even though I told you Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, Yesh mi l'smoich, but they mixed it with grape juice. They didn't mix it with water. Over here we're talking where they mixed it with water. U'mat mayim is kalkalim. We don't mix because with a little bit of water, it can get technically ruined. U'mevarchim shakel, we'll call it a shakel. He says when it comes to diluting with water, it has to do with the minik hamak. Even according to the Ramah, that says you can take 6 parts water, which is very a lot. That has to do that's because he means to say that even if, let's say, it's such a strong wine, and you'll say it'll still have a taste of wine, we don't take that into consideration once it's 6 parts. That's for sure that loses its name of a wine. It's not machlokes. It all depends on the circumstances. And he says, and Rav Shmuel says that we don't go ahead and make it more than 50-50. Just like a spritz. You shouldn't be makel. And Rav Shmuel also says that before you even dilute the wine, which is an important halacha, tzarech levara, it's important for you to investigate how much the wine people did it. I'll explain shortly where it comes in afgemina. B'da dimroshim olav shlo yasifu klum. If you know for a fact they did that, al pi choik mashim lehem lo yisif l'teichu kamois gedoyle. Even if it's not mentioned on the bottle of wine mixed with water, it's not obligated according to what is it called? It's not. There's no obligation to do it according to government laws. When we talk and take into the equation, it's not only how much water you put in, but it's how much water there is in total. And that's why if you have, let's say, the famous case is the grape juice bottles by Kedem grape juice. You have 2 types of hashgochas on Kedem grape juice. You have, locally, you have the regular grape juice bottles that's by the Tzelem Arov, because he allows a certain amount of dilution. But then in Eretz Yisrael, the Bedatz gives the hashgocha on the same grape juice bottle, and I forget what it's called already. They have a name for those grape juice bottles, and they're a special name for it also on the grape juice bottle. It's made by Kedem. But the reason why they have a different hashgacha and they don't have the bedatz is because they dilute it with less water than the ones that are done here in the United States. And therefore there are certain people that are makbid. When they buy a grape juice bottle from Kedem, they'll make sure to have the bedatz hashgacha on there. Otherwise, they feel maybe it was diluted already with too much water, and therefore it's not a proper dilution. In fact, they say the famous story about Rav Moshe Feinstein that he used to say about the Tzelem Arov. They used to ask him, how much water can you put still in the grape juice bottle that you shouldn't be problematic? And he used to say that if you put it out in a drop of water, then it becomes a big, big problem, because the Salem Rav said that this is kosher for abrakosis. He meant up to here it's kosher for abrakosis, but anything more, it'll be questionable if it's kosher for abrakosis.
How do they do the Kedem light? Kedem light is even more fun.
Because I can't tell you, I'm not a connoisseur on this, but I think they mix it with I don't know how they do it. I'm not sure.
What is Mitz Habayit?
Mitz Habayit?
Habi, Atas Bes Ein Yud.
Tough.
Is that natural?
Huh?
That's one of the dots things they write on the bottom.
I don't know. But you have to be careful with this, with the wines and the grape juices. Now, most people, you say to them, if it's a grape juice, don't who needs to dilute grape juice? You drink grape juice, and grape juice is grape juice is grape juice. But let's say the big problem is if someone, let's say, is a diabetic, and they can't take a grape juice, so then they have to ask a local rabbi what the size of the kos is. They should at least have a Chaim Noyes size of a kos, and if they really can't take in too much grape juice, they should find out how many parts water to how many parts wine you're allowed to do. That they should be able to be yoytz the mitzvah abrakosis. And as I mentioned many a time, if you want to get a kos with the proper size, because you get a kos with that's 7, 8, 9 ounces, and then you just drink a little bit of it because you can't drink, or you only drink 1 cup and you can't take 2 or 3, you're not yoytz the mitzvah of abrakosis. So this is basically not for the look of it, it's for the need to be able to do the abrakosis. V'reisi b'sefer kol doidi shekosav the dasa igus moishes zatzal kiramo that echad b'shishim adai mekir yain. It's called 1 to 6 parts is considered wine. L'choyt tzar chloim the kamanos b'zmanenu shatim chalushim v'rabim v'vakshim yain b'li alcohol or kaponim b'midas alcohol ma'at mazir a little bit. It's going to be according to the Igus Moshe. He's a makel on this and saying that that's the derech b'nei Adam. Ki derech b'nei Adam lachshivi liyayin gam kishu mozik harbe. Because many people hold that, like you mentioned with the spritz, it'll be considered still a type of wine. But it's not as simple, Simon says. And as I mentioned here, I showed you many different days on what the mezika can be. There's some that go all the way machma, some that are mekel. So again, as I mentioned before, Shlomo Zalman himself and Rav Elyashiv himself, they all used to dilute it, especially Soif Yomov, but they wanted to make the mitzvah in the proper fashion, and they had wine because they wanted to have an alcohol content, but they put in also some grape juice as well. Don't mix it with water if at all possible.
Sugar in the grape juice is not.
That's a whole different ball of wax, sugar. Again, that's dry wine. Sugar. What do you talk? That what to do is technically don't. If you have the kitza nimritz, if you have a wine that was fermented with sugar, don't use it for Leil Seder. I would say it's preferable not. Use a wine that is naturally sweet. It can be sweet, naturally sweet. It has no alcohol content because you want to have that it should be some type of a content that is kosher for nesachim, and it would be problematic for nesachim, and therefore you want to have what's called a full-fledged wine over here. Therefore, as I mentioned previously, we went through this already. L'maisa lahalocha, if you can use a wine that's not mevushal, I'm not going to go into what the level of mevushal is, or it has a sugar content and no sugar content, that's the best type. And there are, Baruch Hashem, plenty of wines today that are quite sweet and they have a natural sweetness to it. But that's what you should ask for. And then today, Baruch Hashem, you have these booklets. You don't have to be a baki ba'alocha You buy one of these Blumenkranz booklets or something like that. It tells you a list of wines that have no sugar content and they're naturally sweet. But it has to be naturally sweet. It doesn't have to be mamish, what you call dry. But you get a naturally sweet wine. Also, it's better to, we mentioned with the red wines, it's better to have some type of red wine. And they've asked psakim also, a red wine doesn't mean that it has to look like a Malaga or a Concord. Even though it says it's like Dam, it doesn't have to be a Malaga or a Concord. It could be a red wine, a little bit of rosé to it, and it'll suffice. That's what psakim hold. It doesn't have to be red. Okay, we'll continue Metzhem. Next time we're going to try to go more into other halachos of Leil Seder as well. Rav Chananya ben Akasham is Baruch Zak Yisrael Lefikrim Torah Mitzvahs Shenema Adoy Nechofetz Leman Sidko Yagdol Torah V'Yadir.